They're just doing it to make money. They're desperate and they need a job. And I think one of the best things you can do when you go into an interview is to be genuine, know your why, and sell it. You have to sell your why every time, because we need to know that. We need to know that our why and your why match up.
So great to have you here with us today, Liz.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So one of the things I'd love to start out with, and I'm sure this will be helpful for so many of our viewers, is to really talk about your journey and how you became a PA and what decisions you went through along that journey.
So I actually didn't know PAs existed. I had never heard of them before. I wanted to be an English teacher. I went to Sacred Heart University as an English major. And my second semester freshman year, one of my friends said, I want to take this human body class. I don't want to take it alone. Will you take it with me? And I fell in love with the human body. And I called my mom and I remember saying, I don't know if I'm smart enough for this, but I want to try it. And she said, you have to be kidding me. I have known since you were a child that you were meant to go into medicine. And she said, you absolutely do it. Wow. So I switched over from an English major to a biology major, and I had to start fresh because I was doing a bachelor's of arts, and now I switched over to a bachelor's of science. So I had all these credits that didn't count for anything. So they all turned into electives where I needed every single class to graduate. And I'd say that was almost my first obstacle, or my first really bump that I had to go over to say, okay, if you're going to do this, you got to be serious. I gave up field hockey. I made sure that medicine was my number one, and I switched degrees to biology, or switched majors to biology. And I said, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. Wow. So isn't that funky? I know, yeah. I didn't even think about medicine. And I actually, at that point, still didn't even know that physician assistants existed. I was thinking, I'm going to be a doctor. I was studying for my MCAT. Wow. And I studied all summer long my junior year, and I went to walk in to take the test, and I said, I don't want to do this. How heartbreaking.
Oh my goodness. And at that point you still didn't know.
I had no idea
what a PA was?
No. Never. And I said, I almost had like a breakdown. Like, what am I going to do with my life? I walked in, I took the MCAT. It was good enough to get me into school, but I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to study like this. At that time, I was thinking pediatric cardiothoracic surgery, which it would have been a very long road. And I went to the dermatologist. They didn't have any openings with the doctor, and they put me with a PA. And that's how I learned about the whole field. And she said, I'm a PA. I can do procedures. This is what I do.
Right.
And I said, listen, I'm going for my MCAT. I don't think I want to do it. Do you mind if I pick your brain? And for the first 15 minutes of my visit, that woman poured into me with all the knowledge of what it takes to be a PA, how you're not confined to one specialty, how if you want to switch later on, you can. And I said, that's it. I'm going to do it. This is what I'm going to do. And it was that epiphany that I needed, because again, I mean, you spend your whole college career preparing for one route. And then when you realize you don't want to do it, it's crushing. It's just crushing.
Oh my goodness. What did that even feel like to be thinking you were really on your way with one path where you'd already made a change to, and now all of a sudden, something else totally
overwhelming.
Right.
Overwhelming. I remember hysterically crying on the phone with, and I'm not a crier, but I remember hysterically crying on the phone with my college roommate. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. We graduate next year and I don't even have a job. I haven't gotten into med school. I don't want to do this anymore. So I decided to take a year off. I did a gap year. Medical school doesn't let you take anatomy and physiology in college. They want to teach it to you. PA school requires it. Okay. So when I switched tracks, I had everything I needed except for this one course. And so I was the only person in my A&P class in the summer who already had a college degree. Because I had my biology degree. And I was literally just sitting there like, this is so crazy. And I have to say this, it was probably one of the easier classes for me because I had so much of the biology background that I just fell in love with the class. And I said, this is what I want to do. I applied to Mercy College in the Bronx, and it was the only place that didn't require a GRE, if I'm being honest. I didn't want to take another test. The MCAT had scarred me.
Okay.
And so they let me in and said, we'll take a chance on you. We think we see something in you. Wow. And that was it. The rest was history.
Amazing, amazing. And as I, kind of went from, through with your bio, you had some of that pediatric or baby piece of what you started at. So was that really kind of a tie-in, like a kind of a throwback to what you thought you might have been doing as a physician?
It's funny. So I grew up knitting, crocheting, needlepoint. I always thought that I would do surgery. And then when I was a sophomore in college, my sister, who's a bit older than me, she's going to kill me. She's not that much older, guys, maybe like 9.5 years. But she said to me, I'm pregnant. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. It's my first niece or nephew.
Right.
The baby had meconium aspiration and had to go to the newborn ICU. And I said, Amy, if I make it through PA school, I will do 1 year in newborn ICU to give back for the fact that they saved my niece. And that was it. So I remember going through it. I remember being thankful every time we saved a baby, every time we made a difference. I remember sharing my story with the moms and dealing with all of the wonderful patients up in New Haven. But I also remember being in the operating room for a cesarean section and hearing the click of a needle driver. When you go to put a needle on the needle driver and you close the needle driver, it makes this click. It's a very distinctive click. If you're in surgery, you understand what I'm talking about. And I remember hearing it being like, oh, it was just that deep burning and calling got relit in me. And I said, wow, I'm on fire for surgery.
Oh, wow.
So I did exactly what I said. I did a year to give back because they saved Emma. Right. And I said, okay, now I'm going back into surgery.
Oh, wow. What an amazing
interesting
story. So, what kind of bubbles up for me is you got to your achievement, right? You obtained your PA degree, but you went through this amazing just personal transformation in terms of your road to getting there, right? It certainly wasn't the straight and narrow for you. It definitely had some twists and turns.
I agree. It's a lot of up and down, and you have to, in any career, just really make sure that you keep focused. You have to keep focused on what you're doing. You have to keep your eye on the prize, because it's so easy to just give up, especially in medicine, because the tests are hard. Right? I mean, it's a hard program to get into. It's a hard program to go through. But if you can keep your eye on the prize, if you can find your why and find it early and keep it present and center, it's so impactful. It makes life so much easier.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, for having known you for so long and just hearing your personal story for the first time in that much detail, it's just absolutely amazing. And I know you didn't want to, you said, should I be pulling my sleeve down not showing that tattoo? But it's certainly understand the connection to it and the meaning behind it. So thank you so much for sharing that story with us.
Yeah, of course. I think, getting a tattoo that represents the Bible and a verse that meant so much to me to remind me that we're here to do good. And it may not always feel like that because you may not always get the patient outcome you want, but knowing that you're pure in heart and you're trying to do good is really helpful. And so I had put it, I'm right hand dominant, so I put it on my right hand, but also an area where I'll see it every time I scrub. So that's it. Jeremiah 29:11. Hopefully you guys can see it.
Wow. That's amazing. It's amazing. And to really just bring that faith with you, whether it's during your schooling or every day when you scrub in on a case.
Yeah, it's true.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Thank you. So let's talk about the new grad interview process. I'm sure you've, in your time, reviewed hundreds and hundreds of resumes and have interviewed scores and countless numbers of physician assistants, but let's talk about the new grad.
Okay.
Can you take me through your process, that interview process from resume moving forward?
So one of the main things we look for is grades. Did they do well? Where were their elective rotations? Did they have enough experience or enough exposure, I should say? Did you have enough exposure during your training to give you a good enough feel for the field you want to go into? The next would be definitely your references. Are your references strong? Because you don't have the experience, right? I mean, we have to call a spade a spade. You're coming in freshly graduated, freshly passing your boards. And I think your references are going to speak a lot for you. And I think when you're going through the interviewing process and you're spiffing up your resume, you need to be very careful which references you pick, It's always nice to have someone from a field that you want to enter. So if you want to go into orthopedics, maybe you did an orthopedic rotation, that orthopedic surgeon that you've bonded with, that knows your skill set, that can speak to that, should be one of your references. A director, someone in your program should be one of your references. But it's really important who you pick, because that's who's speaking for you. There's literally, we have nothing else to go on.
Absolutely.
And I think, people say the school matters. Not so much to us. We care more about the person, I think, at the end of the day. All leaders do. Everybody's trainable.
Right.
But I think it really does depend on your references.
So let me back up just a minute, because one of the first things you said was about a resume and the new grad resume and making sure that there's enough information on there. Many of the new grad resumes that I've always seen are very standard and generic. So what would pop out to you that says this person has a great interest in orthopedics or cardiology or whatever it might be? Are there specifics you're looking for as it relates to their rotation? And what other kind of information would you like to see on a resume that shows that demonstrated interest? Like, this person isn't just picking orthopedics out of thin air.
I think it's really important that you go above and beyond on your resume. I think it's important where, if you're doing volunteer work, you include it. If you're a leader, maybe you're treasurer or president or vice president for your class, that you contribute that on your resume. I'm looking for something to show me that you can handle school and going a bit above and beyond on that. Also, when it comes to orthopedics, your skill sets, how many cases have you done? We ask a case log. During school is not the time to be shy. It's the time to make sure you're in the operating room. You're seeing doctors. You're seeing as many patients as possible. You're getting your hands dirty and doing as much as possible. So I think it is the best time for you to be able to break out of your comfort zone. Try as many different things as you can and make sure that whatever you're doing for your skill set to improve it, whether it's your suturing skills, maybe you took a suturing class, I would put that on there. Anything to show me that you've gone above and beyond.
That interest.
Yes, and that you know what's expected from this job.
Awesome. So, okay, so now you've selected a resume, you've, someone's demonstrated that interest enough to kind of get your attention, and now we've started the interview process. Take me through a normal interview process as you see it for, even in your current role.
The first thing I'll always ask them is, why are you here? Why do you want this job? Why is it important to you? What's your why? I'll have them tell me a little bit about themselves. I tend to be a little bit more of an eccentric person when I interview someone. So I'll say, I want to know something that's not on your resume. Give me one thing that's not on your resume. It could be, I like to kayak, I like to knit, but I want to know who I'm hiring. And I need to see you come alive with more than what you're telling me on the paper.
So really getting them to speak about something that they're passionate about, right? Because they're not coming in with experience as an orthopedic PA. So how could they bring passion forward and show you that, in another aspect of their personal life? Okay.
Exactly. And then the other thing I'll ask them is, you're going to fill in the blank for me. I'm the most productive when I feel, and I just sit there and see what they say. Most people will say, when I feel supported, when I feel valued, when I feel heard. The other thing is, they need to come into they need to come into this interview being very confident in what they know and very comfortable in accepting what they don't know. I always tell my candidates, cocky people kill people. You will not come in here and act like you know it all. We don't expect you to know it all. And you need to be comfortable enough with yourself and secure enough to come to me when you need help and say, I don't know this. I don't feel comfortable doing this. I could use some assistance on this. Because when people come in thinking they know it all, that's when patients get hurt.
Absolutely. I love that you bring that up, and we're going to certainly hit on that a little bit later in our talk today. But letting those candidates know that if they're not asking for the mentoring, and that also hopefully will give the folks that are watching this the ability to understand that you're going to go in and you're not going to know everything. And the worst thing you could do is pretend like you know everything and not be in a position where you're comfortable enough to ask those questions. It's so important, but a lot of that is finding the right fit and balance with the person, with the employer that's going to hire you and the person that's going to mentor you. That's true. Feel like you can come forward and ask those questions and not be worried. So I'm hoping that gives the viewers a lot of that comfort in terms of just understanding what this new venture is going to be like for them as they start their professional journes.
Yeah, and never lose your vulnerability. Never lose your vulnerability. It's a tough word on this, but never lose it, because all the way throughout your career, you need to be able to know when to ask for help. And as you progress, you don't all of a sudden become an expert. Medicine's always changing. You always have to be willing to learn and be vulnerable and go out there and continue learning and doing your CMEs and going to the conferences. And you never stop learning as a PA. So I don't know if you ever lose that new grad feel, you know?
Absolutely. So you gave our viewers two really, I think, awesome questions. What do you, and if you need a moment to think about this, but what do you think is the toughest question that a new grad could get asked? What do you think is one of the toughest questions, maybe that you know of or that you yourself kind of have in your bag of tricks?
It's funny because I had an interview today. I was interviewing someone and I said to them, how do you deal with conflict? And she said, that's always the hardest question. And it is, and especially for a new grad, because as we are interviewing you, we want to know, how do you deal with other people? Because there's no crash course to see how they're going to handle if another PA is picking on them or if they have a difficult patient. And they don't really have enough experience outside of their clinical rotations. So I think they need to think ahead. You know, they probably know their strengths. Obviously, their weakness is going to be that they don't have a lot of experience, but how they handle conflict, how they handle working with other team members, you really have to pull on acting as if your clinical rotations were a job. And I think going in with that mindset is, I have a year of experience. It's just 5, 6, 8 weeks at a time in different hospitals. But usually the question that I find people will take that moment and think about is, how do you handle conflict? Okay. How do you handle a difficult patient? The other question I'll ask, and they may not have an answer for it yet, is, what's the biggest medical error you've made and how did you fix it? Did you own up to it?
Right.
Who caught it? That kind of thing.
So let's go back to the question about conflict, right? Because we're going to have a lot of new grads that say, great, you know, I've read that in a book or someone else has told me or I've seen it on the internet. But the $64,000 question is, you as someone who interviews and hires physician assistants, what's a great answer? What do you think would be a good way to answer a question like that? What's like the framework?
For me, it's head on. It's not avoiding that there's a conflict. It's saying, we're coming to a disagreement and I want to deal with it head on and I want to deal with it early. I don't want to let it build. And if it seems like it's spiraling out of control and I can't take care of it myself, I want to be able to know that I can go to a leader and ask for help and get it.
Okay.
You know, because what I don't like is when people will tell me, oh, I just handle it on my own. Or I'll get them in a room and talk it out with them. Because sometimes, especially from an HR perspective, right? That's also not the best way to handle it because it may not be safe for that new grad.
Right.
You know?
So what do you think about the new graduate who maybe obviously hasn't had experience as a professional, as a physician assistant? If you're asking them a tough question and maybe they revert back to a prior career or a job that they had growing up and they're still able to articulate, but what if they answer the question at a context of, you know, the hospital or, you know, the traditional physician assistant setting?
I think it all counts. I think life experience has to be counted. We've been learning how to deal with conflict since we were a child. So I think that's very welcomed in an interview, to show me that you can think outside the box and you may not have it with medicine, but you have examples elsewhere. I think that works sufficiently.
And that becomes a transferable
100%.
skill.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What happens when maybe you're hiring the physician assistant, they're going to be reporting to you, but now you have a whole host of other folks that are involved in the process. You have human resources, maybe you have a nursing department head, you have the physician. How do you come to consensus on a candidate? And what if you don't come to consensus? How does that conflict get resolved?
We do deal with that quite a bit. For the most part, I feel like if your physician, who's going to be your supervising physician, is in support of your decision, that's the most important. Because we have to remember, as physician assistants, we're putting their license on the line as well. So I can say, I really like this candidate, and my supervising physician can say, I don't. In the end, they may have more say than me because they're putting their license on the line to say, I don't feel comfortable. This person seems like a risk to me. So I think in the end, I have a lot of weight in the say, especially if it's a clinical role. If it's an administrative role, it's very different because I'm not putting my supervising physician at a risk. But I would say if you and your supervising physician agree, you're in a good spot. If you don't agree, then you need to sit down and say, okay, what makes you hesitant? So for me, we had a woman that we were interviewing, and the supervising physicians loved them. And I told them no. And I said, the reason they're leaving their job is because they think it's too long of a commute. They're not here because they like orthopedics. They're not here because they're dedicated. They want to build this team. They're here because it's going to save them 5 minutes on their commute. No way are we hiring this person. I found out a couple of weeks later, I had spoken to someone else who had interviewed her a little bit farther upstate. And they said, yeah, she's someone who tends to push her work to other people. And it was just one of those things where you almost have to trust what you're feeling on the inside, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Where very rarely will I put my foot down, but you also have a say. They're reporting to me. You know, it's very different.
Absolutely.
Than if they're reporting to a different structure. But if they're reporting to me and my supervising physician loves them and I don't, I'm going to fight for why I don't want them here. I'm going to use, like you're saying, examples of the past. Working with people that had the same type of attributes that this person was displaying. And your interview, I mean, your first impression is so important. So I'm actually glad you guys are doing this because it is so vital. All they see is this little snippet of you. And it's so important that you answer these questions correctly. Because let's say the woman was a great PA, it just put a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
And that, ruined it for me.
So you said an interesting word, and it's a word that we use a lot when we're talking about, making that decision to make a match between a physician assistant and an employer. And that was the word risk. So what do you think about that word as it relates to making a decision on hire?
I'm very thankful for that 90-day period where you can say this isn't working, right? Because like I said, you don't know much about them outside of that interview. You see something in them, they're going to be good, and then they show up, and you need to have that 90-day period because it is a risk. It is a risk to hire any PA. I want to make sure I'm not putting the new grads in this lowly bucket because that's not by any means what I'm saying, but it's a risk to hire anyone, and if they make a medical error, the hospital's accountable, their supervising physician's accountable, they're accountable. It could do something in the sense of create a joint commission visit. So it's not a small thing. It's a big risk, and you have to be confident. And I'm thankful for the leaders who have built us up to let us know what red flags look like. You
took the words right out of my mouth because it was a great segue into the next natural component of making that decision, that risk. Do we take that risk to bring this person on board? So in the interview process, right, there are red flags that come up that say, all right, let's be a little bit more cautious here. Maybe we need to dig a little bit deeper, ask some more questions. And then there's what we call those go green flags, which is like, all right, let's have more of this. And so what do you think about those, cautious kind of red flags?
The difference between the two? Okay, so red flags. I'm going to pull this closer because this is important. For me, when they don't know the job they're interviewing for, especially if I call to bring them in for an interview. You're calling from where? Which job is this? And it's one of the most frustrating things for me because I don't feel valued at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. What does that really look like in actuality?
They've over-applied. They're just looking for a paycheck. They don't really care about my institute, and they're not doing it to better themselves or my program. They're just doing it to make money. They're desperate and they need a job. And I think one of the best things you can do when you go into an interview is to be genuine, know your why, and sell it. You have to sell your why every time, because we need to know that. We need to know that our why and your why match up. Do the research. What is my why? It's our mission, our vision. It's all over our website. So it's so important that they come in with that background information, that they know what makes us tick, what's important for us. And if it doesn't line up with what's important to them, don't apply for the job. Because then at the end of the day, it's just going to be a paycheck for them. And there's nothing that's a bigger turnoff to a leader than someone who's just coming to get a job done. Like, just check the box.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why is that so important to recognize during the interview process?
Because I think it goes back to what we were talking about with the risk. It's, I'm taking a risk on you. And by taking a risk on you, not just that you're not going to harm our patients, but the fact that I've said no to other people who probably had a better why or were invested. And so there's this risk that I'm taking that you're better than everybody else that I've chosen. You know, and so if you're not invested in me and you're not invested in the institute and you're not invested in the program, I mean, that's going to show. The patients are going to see it. The physicians are going to see it. It's not going to be a good match. And then we're both re-hunting for a new person.
Absolutely.
You're having to go out there and find a new job, and I'm having to go out there and find someone to replace you.
Yep.
So for me, that's a red flag, not knowing anything about the institute, not looking into the program, not knowing what job you've applied for, making it clear. The other thing I can't stand is when they apply for several jobs at the same hospital, especially if they're in different departments. How are you doing newborn ICU and ortho? Which way do you want to go? You know, because it feels like, again, they're just looking for a job.
Right. What does that say to you as the interviewer when you find that out? How do you even tackle that with a candidate, or do you just move on?
Yes, and this is the thing the candidates don't know, is if they use a program like we use, when you go to click on their name, it tells you all the jobs that they've applied for. So there are no secrets. We're not being secretive when you think you're going to apply to the newborn ICU and then you're going to apply to the Department of Surgery. They don't talk to each other. They won't know. We absolutely do know. HR knows. We know as leaders. And it's one of the things where it's like, so you don't know what you want to do. I mean, again, it goes back to the why. You have to know your why, and you have to sell your why.
That's worth the price of admission.
Right?
That little secret right
yes,
there.
Yes.
100%.
It's
wow.
so true. Another red flag for me is at the end of every interview, no matter where you go, they should always ask you, do you have any questions for me? And just the silence. It's a nerve-wracking procedure.
Right.
Well, we can call it a procedure. It may not feel like surgery, but it's a nerve-wracking procedure that you're going through. Right. I always recommend write them down. Right. Come with questions. And
so what does it feel like when someone shows up and you've had maybe even a pretty good interview, and then you ask them if they have questions and you're getting like the blank stare?
Yeah, it makes me a little hesitant. Like, how did you not see this? This is a home run question. Everyone always asks this. You have to come prepared with this. Some of my favorite questions to ask would be, what type of leader are you? Who can I go to for support? Or how can I build myself? Where's my room for growth? Where's my room to educate myself? Because I think it's so important that we understand this is a two-way street. This is what I can provide for your program. And the questions that I'm asking myself are, what can you provide for me? Because if you can only provide for me and I can't provide for you, that means you're not growing. You're not going to be educated. You're going to become very stagnant. It's not good for patient care.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yep. So that's a great kind of look into what questions they should be asking. What shouldn't they be asking? Like, what are the questions you hear where you're like, oh my God, I loved you up until this point. Now, like, I wish she just didn't say this.
It's so true. What's my salary? You should never start negotiating on the interview. It comes off cocky. It comes off like,
they don't have an offer yet, right?
Exactly. You don't even have an offer, and you already think you're getting the job. I don't really appreciate when people ask more about the perks than the actual job quite yet. So I think that would go together, right? Your salary, your benefits.
Right.
You can ask roughly, who do you use for 401k or things like that you should know, but how much they put into it, contribution, PTO. I think you need to save that for your negotiation stage, or you need to save that for your offer stage.
Absolutely.
I think your initial interview really needs to be selling your why, proving that you're going to be a benefit to the program, And then also asking, all right, what am I going to get back from it? How can I grow that's going to help improve patient care? Always spin it for a positive. Even if they ask you, what's your weakness? One of my red flags is I have a weakness and this is just a weakness. You have to say, I have a hard time saying no. So I'm working on that because I understand when I say no, my yes becomes more powerful. You know, we expect you to have a weakness, but it's so much more powerful when you can turn it into a strength at the same time.
And be able to talk about even having that self-awareness that I know this is a weakness. I recognized before I showed up for the interview that this is a weakness. And this is what I've been doing to work on that. To work on it and move myself along and get better and
100%.
Have it be less of a weakness.
Yeah. The best thing you can have in an interview is emotional intelligence. You have to read who's interviewing you. Just like we've been doing this for a very long time, right? So I can easily read, oh, that question didn't sit well with them or they need time to think about it. And that's fine. Take the time. I think if you answer too quickly and you don't take that moment to think about it, another red flag. I don't want someone who's impulsive. I want someone who can stay calm and collected under times of pressure, like an interview, and who can take that moment to collect themselves and still come up with a well-versed answer.
Well, and I think you make more of a connection as human beings when it's more relaxed and someone's not being impulsive or pushing the pace of an interview and just trying to like get out all that information. But then it becomes more of a natural kind of back and forth and a connection. And I think that's gold for understanding if that person is a good risk.
Right. Right. It's true. And having that vulnerability to share a little bit of your backstory, you know, get a little tenderhearted, share a little bit about your why. For me, that's a green. That's a go flag.
Awesome.
Okay. Someone knows their why and they're willing to open up a little bit to me about it. You don't have to share a whole life story, but you want to make sure that you share a little bit of your background.
Absolutely.
Because you need something that you're going to connect with the person you're interviewing. And it's not always about medicine. It could be about faith. It could be about, you know, I got started because it always made my grandfather proud. He was a physician and I want to follow in his steps. So I'm going to be a PA or something of that sort. But it helps break the ice and it helps if anything else, but to remind me, this person across the table from me is a human. It breaks the ice a bit. It makes it where I feel like it doesn't have to be so harsh. It's not so black and white.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yep. So I think we've covered so much already up to this point. We've covered, the whole interview process. We've covered some of those, getting into the do's and don'ts during the interview process, at least. And we touched a little bit on, and maybe we'll go into a little bit further now, the compensation, the negotiation, which you loud and clear, as a new grad, you're not bringing that up like in the first interview. So what's my salary going to be? So what are your thoughts on a new grad negotiating?
I think it's hard to negotiate as a new grad. I think
Why?
Because they have no background and no experience. So you're all sort of starting at the same place. We call it market value, right? We do this market analysis and we make sure that every offer we give is equitable. Everybody gets the same amount of PTO if you're working for a hospital. You build it up, and I can't speak for every hospital, but that's something that you build up. That's part of something that's harder to negotiate. Private practice is different. CME money, it's a good thing to negotiate if you're in private practice. Again, hospitals tend to have that set, but you don't have the experience. You don't have the skill set where you can really push negotiation. Maybe you can get a sign-on bonus. We tend to always keep that in our back pocket. It actually might be a good temperature gauge for how committed we are. If we really like you and you say, is there any, and just ask, right? It doesn't hurt to ask. Is there any way we can do a sign-on bonus? If we like you, we're going to give it to you. If we don't, we're just going to be like, this is a salary.
Right.
It's fair, it's equitable, and this is what we're going to go with. But negotiation's hard. The other thing is, especially as a new grad, don't go after the money. And this is so tempting. I get it. We're all in debt. You come out of PA school and you're like, my gosh,
God, my loan's coming up.
My loans are crazy. Like, how long's that grace period? Can we push that longer than 6 months? I always tell, when I give lectures to graduate level school, I always say, don't ever go after the money for your first job. Go after the person who's going to pour into you. Because it's the experience that you have that when you go to your next job, you'll be able to say, but here I've done X, Y, and Z. And then you can negotiate. And just because you don't negotiate when you first get the job doesn't mean you can't negotiate later. Ooh, excuse me. Sorry. Doesn't mean you can't negotiate later, right? When you can negotiate at your 1-year annual review, any annual review you have. Look, I've done X, Y, and Z. I started here. I've grown this much. I've taken these many courses. My suturing skill has gotten a lot better. I've helped you with and have the metrics prepared. I've done this many cases where last year we could only do this many. Prove your worth. And just because you can't negotiate at the first interview doesn't mean you can't negotiate later. But don't ever take the job just because it's based on money. Take it because you know you're going to have growth. They're going to educate you. They're going to pour into you. That experience is what allows you to negotiate in the future.
Awesome. So we're talking about new grads, but does it change the landscape at all if someone came out of PA school and then they did that 1-year residency? Because those are becoming more and more, popular or available for graduates.
That's a great point. Now you have negotiating ability because now you have the experience. In fact, if I recall, you don't get paid as much during the residency, but it gives you that experience so that you can say, look at everything I've done during this program. You have higher references because they worked with you for a year versus when you're a new grad and you've only worked with someone in a clinical rotation for like 6 weeks at a time. But residencies, absolutely. Now you have a lot of negotiating power that you didn't have as a new grad.
Let's talk a little bit about the next phase. So now you've met that great candidate. You're taking a risk on one another. They've made it through the credentialing phase, which for new grads is a lot easier than folks who have multiple licenses and things like that.
Don't take that for granted. I mean, I always say have enough in the bank to get you through 3 months, but new grads we can usually do in about 2 because you don't have to do so much of a background history.
Absolutely. So now we're looking at onboarding. That brand new graduate, they've made it through credentialing. They show up on your doorstep that first morning and you've entered the honeymoon phase.
Yes. Oh, the honeymoon phase.
Yeah. Let's talk about what they really shouldn't be doing. What are the things that they could come in their first job and really not do, things that will really kind of make a negative impact on that initial experience and relationship building?
Not be a team player. Act like we owe them something. Entitlement is one of the biggest red flags in your first 90 days.
What does that look like? Someone coming in and being entitled?
Someone coming in acting like they shouldn't be seeing the extra patients. Why am I staying late if I'm not getting paid for it? I operated with that surgeon yesterday. Why do I have to do it today? Worst things you can say.
Wow.
Right? I mean, because you want someone who's a go-getter, who understands I'm new, but I'm going to do everything I can to learn everything I can. Even if it means I have to stay late for 30 minutes and not get paid for it, I'm willing to make the sacrifice because that is someone in my mind where when I am doing the annual review, I'm going to be like, look at all those times you really helped us. Guys, leaders keep track of that. We have a journal, whether we admit it or not, or maybe it's a mental journal. I tend to write stuff down. So that way, when the annual review comes up, I'll say, hey, look at all these positive things you did for us. Thank you so much. And I do think coming into this thinking, I don't have to do this. I've earned you haven't earned your keep at all. We never earn our keep. You're always earning it. But yeah, I mean.
So what are some of the other things that might come up that you've had experience with that like, wow, probably shouldn't have done that right out the gate?
Yeah. Being overconfident. I've seen a couple people who are, the root of it's insecurity. If you look back on it from some of the people that I've pulled aside to talk to, and they try to overcompensate. Right. So in your honeymoon phase, you don't want to try to act like you are better than you are. You don't want to overcompensate to the point where it's like you're trying to keep up with the people in your group that have been doing this for 15, 20, 30 years.
Can you give all those folks out there a good example? Because I'm sure you have someone that you're thinking of in your brain that maybe overcompensated.
Yes. We had someone, I'll never forget, the person had just had abdominal surgery. And I said, do you want me to help you pack the wound? The actual patient.
Okay.
The patient. I'm sorry. The patient had
I was
abdominal.
like, who actually had
That's a way to get a job. Get operated on.
That was a misplaced modifier. Okay.
But the patient had just had abdominal surgery.
Okay.
And they went to pack a wound. It's very simple. You pull like a shoelace out, you put a new shoelace in. Okay.
Okay.
So I said to them, do you need help? Nope, I got it. I said, okay. And they came back and the bottle was empty. I said, where did all that packing go? And they said, well, I put it in the belly. And I said, how much did you pull out? And they were like, this much. And I said, so you pulled out this much and you put in this much? They had torn through the fascia and was packing the abdominal cavity, had broken a vessel, and the patient ended up bleeding. And had we not gone back to check. Wow. But to them, it's simple procedure. I've done it before in clinic, not a big deal. Right. You know, always have someone at least go with you to walk you through the first couple times, even if you've done it in your electives or you've done it in your rotations. It's a different world than when you're actually doing it in real life. When you put that long white coat on, there's a lot of pressure that goes with that. And everybody acts different. And I think you have to just be cognizant of that during your honeymoon phase, like you're saying. Some people overcompensate. Some people are shy and they don't want to do anything. And some people just are lazy. And they think they've earned their way. I've done my school. I know my stuff. I passed my boards. Obviously, I'm good enough to be here. We're never good enough. And the one thing that my supervising physician always says to me is everyone's replaceable. And you have to go in with that mentality. Everyone is always replaceable. I'm replaceable. Absolutely. You're replaceable. And so it's important that you sell yourself and that you always remember why you're doing this. You know, and it's never truly for the money, right? We don't go into it for the money.
So you kind of, you know, it did a great segue into we're talking about what not to do. But on the flip side, what can a new graduate do when they start that first job to show that they're engaged and they're ready to go and learn? What are things that they're doing that are, you know, really good?
Take the appropriate level of initiative. And I'm hesitant to say take initiative because I don't want you to go, I don't want the pendulum to swing so far.
Okay.
But take the appropriate level of initiative. Is there anything I can help you with? Ask for feedback. The best feedback you get is the stuff you ask for because it makes the leader feel a lot more comfortable giving it. It's hard to give negative feedback. We always talk about the sandwich, positive, negative, positive. But when you ask for feedback, it sort of takes this load off of the leader to say, oh, I can give you honest feedback. I think that's one of the best things that they can do is, how did I do today? Out of the patients I saw or the procedures I did, where could I get better? Hey, I know you want me to practice my suturing skills. What do you recommend I suture with? What type of suture do you want me to use? Chicken breasts, bananas? Do you have fake skin? Always ask what you can do more, what you can do better, because it just shows them that you're taking initiative, even if you're fine.
Right.
It just shows that you're taking
What does
initiative.
that make you feel like when you have that new grad that is taking those types of great initiatives?
That I made the right choice, that I took a good risk. My risk paid off. You know, they're hungry. They want to learn. They're here to stay. This is someone that's going to make an impact. This is someone that I can teach and mold and make this fantastic practitioner.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Makes me want to say, do you have a brother or a sister that's doing the same thing? A cousin, someone else? You know, a twin?
Let's get them through the program and over to us.
Go. Yeah,
awesome.
so
Awesome.
true.
So one final question for you today. I'm your genie, and I'm going to be able to grant you the wish of going back to those moments where you were deciding to become a PA. Now, looking back with all the experience and know-how that you've gained over the years, what's that one critical piece of advice you would give to yourself that would have made all the difference in this journey you've been on so far?
That's a good question. Don't give up. Truly, you are going to hit bumps in the road. There's going to be times where you feel like, why am I doing this? I'm not making a difference. You're going to make medical mistakes. We all do. Don't ever give up and do not forget your why. Keep that front and center because that will get you through dark nights and it will help you celebrate in the good times. But don't give up and don't forget your why.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Wonderful. Liz, I cannot thank you enough. Just wonderful chatting with you.
Ditto.
Absolutely. And we hope that everybody out there has learned a great deal from Liz today. So thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you again on another episode of What Not to Do When You Become a PA. Thanks so much, folks. Have a great day.